This is the fresh out of the oven with the baker's dozen. Watch a rapper turn to nothing at the hands of rubbish. A couple crutching with the bait still can't catch us. And it's just my luck that my year of coming up, I still been raising a tear up above. Weak-minded politicking with some pretty women and a dozen to get daddy begging for the plays on Insta. Before you talk all your shit, do your research. Before you get a feature, better change your t-shirt. Close sister in town, cause you been feeling blue. I've been doing me, so what does it matter to you? Never gave a fuck, money I was saving up. Trying to make it out the city, I done been brave enough. Chasing blunts with money schemes and honey dreams. Enough to turn waves of energy to symmetry. And play it through your speakers just to resonate within. And accurately display the life of every kid who suffer steady here, but still yet they live in an environment and see life for what it is. Still I persist, never backing down from anything. Faders in my left and my right holds the mic. The key 2 octaves below where my soul exists. Trapped in this lower end, I'm more focused than I've ever been since I first started in. But this is just the beginning. This is just the beginning. But this is just the beginning. 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 Hey, this is just the beginning.
This is WYCD Wicked. That stands for What You Can Do. My name's Jake, and today, oh boy, George Santos in more trouble than we even thought. Trump spread some lies about Ashley Babbitt and also about her mother. And then, tying right in nicely with that, the state's investigation into the elector fraud scheme and what you can do to free your state of election deniers, what you can do to get them put in prison. It's becoming increasingly clear that this is a matter for the states to handle as well as the federal government. We'll go into details during that segment of the show, but I want to start it off with George Santos. Seems like corporate media is just now catching up to the biggest part of the George Santos story. And when I say biggest, I mean it has the most implications for the USA. And that would be the $700,000 he lent himself. Let's have a gander at a fella named Lawrence O'Donnell. I often rank the corporate media types on a sort of constantly updating list based on their past history and recent activity of where they stand. Lawrence O'Donnell has been rising and rising since 2016. He didn't used to be a talking head, I suppose. A talking head that looked very closely at the systematic problems in the USA, and he has become one. He has become somebody who is critical in a fair way of the way the United States operates. He started asking questions that I love to hear asked on a major platform like that. So let's listen to him now talking about the most important part of the George Santos story.
The craziest election story of the year got crazier today and possibly a bit more criminal, with CNBC reporting more details about how George Santos lied his way into the House of Representatives. Wealthy donors received calls and emails from a man who said he was Dan Meyer, Republican leader Kevin McCarthy's chief of staff during the 2020 and 2022 election cycles, according to people familiar with the matter. His name was actually Sam Miele, and he worked for Santos raising money for his campaign, according to one GOP donor who contributed to Santos's campaign. The financier and some others in this story declined to be named in order to speak freely about private discussions. Let's
go back just a little bit. So this is, in my opinion, not the most important part of the Santos story. He will get to that. But it is interesting. So if you're looking for signs that a politician or a rich person, often they're the same person, will actually receive consequences for their actions, the number one sign would be, did they do a crime against another rich person or another powerful person? Case in point, Wells Fargo stole billions from its customers over a period of years and suffered very little consequences for it. Sam Bankman-Fried stole billions from wealthy people and is suffering immediate consequences. So this is good news for us that are interested in justice in the USA. This is good news because that means Santos will have made even more enemies, and he will have made enemies out of people that actually the Justice Department cares about.
Speak freely about private discussions. That report goes on to detail how George Santos's lies about being Jewish earned him at least one major donation from a member of the Republican Jewish Coalition, a group that has since banned him from future events. Today, the Campaign Legal Center filed a formal complaint with the Federal Elections Commission accusing George Santos of knowingly and willfully concealing the true sources of his.
I just got to make fun of Republicans a little bit. Of course, the Republican Jewish Coalition will take offense when it's a lie about being Jewish. Although I'm heckling the Republicans for only caring when something affects them. Truth be told, they're called the Republican Jewish Coalition. Fairness where it's due, they're supposed to be looking out in matters relating to this. So, I'm just being mean unnecessarily there.
Campaign's funding, misrepresenting how his campaign spent its money, and illegally paying for personal expenses with campaign funds. Federal prosecutors in New York are currently investigating George Santos and his financial dealings. A separate inquiry by a New York district attorney and in Brooklyn is scrutinizing all of the lies he told to get elected to see if any of them crossed the threshold from unethical to illegal. George Santos refused to answer any questions about any of this today.
Why don't you answer our questions? Please clear the way. We'll be addressing the media soon.
When is soon?
On my time.
Your time. You're representing the people of New York.
Joining us now is David Kelly,
Wow.
former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. For me, the mystery of the $700,000. Suddenly, George Santos lends his campaign $700,000 because the only person who has no campaign contribution limits is the candidate himself. If someone gave him $700,000, that person wouldn't be able to put it directly into the campaign.
Boom. Get him, Lawrence.
Isn't the $700,000 where all the investigative focus should be?
You know, I got to tell you, Lawrence, as a prosecutor looking at this case is kind of looking at your plate at a Thanksgiving feast and thinking to yourself, where do I begin? But yeah, I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here. The 199.99 disbursements and the FEC and so forth. But obviously, you're going to turn, I think, your attention most to the $750,000 campaign contribution that he made, and question, where did he get
Good
this?
Lord.
And if he got it, it's income. Did he file his taxes? Is he concealing the money from somebody else? Is he possibly engaging in money laundering by having done so? So there's a whole host of avenues that you're going to pursue here.
So how does it get from a Federal Elections Commission violation, which is essentially
Pausing it there because they're moving on. That is a great point that his guest has just made here. Yeah, if the man had that much money, if he genuinely got it somehow, did he file the taxes for it? Because right now, we're not really sure where it came from. It means the public does not have a record of it. And if he if it wasn't his money, if it was essentially in his bank account for 2 days or whatever, then the question is, who's he laundering it for? Is that laundering? It seems like it would be, but that is a fantastic question to have answered. And hopefully it does get answered.
Meaningless. People violate FEC rules all the time and they don't get penalized for it. How does it go from that to what happened to Michael Cohen, where he ended up doing 3 years, getting sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for a campaign finance violation?
Jesus, we just kind of skirted over such a major thing. People violate FEC rules all the time, and they don't get fined for it. They should, for the record. They should.
Violation, the $130,000 spent to silence Stormy Daniels was considered to be, in effect, an illegal contribution to the campaign. How do you get this kind of campaign contribution into investigation into the criminal territory?
Well, in Cohen's case, he also had some personal tax issues unrelated to the Stormy Daniels. But that having been said, the FEC has a lot of technical violations that are treated civilly. Oftentimes, you give an opportunity to correct it. But when you have a whole pattern of what appear to be intentionally concealing or intentionally misleading, that will turn it into a criminal violation. And not only from FEC standpoint, but you also get into fraud issues. I mean, you talked about at the outset here, concealing from where he got the money and maybe misleading people about his background. There could be some fraud charges there as well. So taking it from the civil context to the criminal really looks at kind of the pattern, the intent, and what you're trying to achieve here, which is an intentionally misleading the FEC as to where your money has come from and how you use that, as opposed to a technical violation and oversight or just kind of sloppy bookkeeping.
Okay, so the takeaway there is that there is a large amount of money to be tracked. $750,000 is hard to hide. If it were $2,000, you might be able to say, "Oh, my parents gave it to me. They believed in my campaign. They believed in their son, and they gave me $2,000." If it were $10,000, you might be able to say, "You know what? That a business gave that to me. I apologize. I didn't file it, and I should have, and I'll take my slap on the wrist or whatever fine, and that'll get waived because yada yada, corrupt justice system." $750,000. Ooh boy, that ain't nothing. I also think, and I don't reckon this is going to be pursued very hard to my constant ire, but I do also think we ought to look very closely at the Russian connection here. Believe the link is in the description. Andrew and Trader, that was a name when we first talked about George Santos on this channel. We also mentioned Andrew and Trader. He's the money manager for a Russian oligarch called named Viktor Vekselberg. And he gave $29,000 and some change to the Santos campaign. You want to look for people that Santos has a connection with that would have $750,000 to give the man for whatever nefarious purpose. That'll be Viktor Vekselberg, without a doubt. This guy's companies have also been up to shady business, to the point that they had to do a rebrand and just be called something else altogether. So Santos, unsurprisingly, had a lot of pro-Putin talking points and put in work to try to get America to stop helping Ukraine. Setting aside the morality of that, it is in America's interest for, number one, the Ukrainians to prevail in their war against Russia, which is invading them currently, as we speak right now, as we're warm and have reliable electricity. A lot of Ukrainians aren't, because they're getting shelled. A lot of Ukrainians are never going to do anything again because they've been killed. Unprovoked assault, unprovoked invasion from Russia. It's hard for me to set aside the morality. I said I would. Let's genuinely set it aside for a moment. It's in America's interest because it drains Russian resources. According to Bob Mueller, Russia did interfere in the 2016 election. Russia almost certainly interfered in the 2020 election. Russia is not a friend. When we talk about our strategic petroleum reserves, why do we have those? For the hypothetical war we may one day need to fight against Russia and or China. If it ever came to that, obviously, we're not going to get oil from these folks. So we have to have our own oil to fight with. Well, right now, Russia's burning through their oil. It's costing them, literally, gasoline to fight the war they're fighting. Also, they've shown that their military, maybe not a paper tiger, but certainly a cardboard one. It wasn't as bad as we thought it would be. They've lowered themselves significantly on the world stage. That is all to America's, if we're just talking purely greed, that is all to America's benefit. Then if you talk about the morality, there's no debate to be had. Ukraine is a country that got invaded on a weak pretext. If you were to ask a Putin supporter why Ukraine was invaded, you'll get the same kind of answers that you'll get from Trump supporters in America when you ask them why any policy exists that Trump put into place. They will be sporadic, they'll be different for each person you ask, and they'll be vague. Because they're lies. And they're not particularly advanced lies. They're pretty bald-faced, as a matter of fact. Well, George Santos, this guy who is Brazilian-American, we think, he was super on the side of Russia. And surprise, surprise, he got a huge influx of cash on the record from Vekselberg, or at the very least, Andrew and Trader, the money manager and I believe cousin of Vekselberg. Did he also get the $750,000 from the same guy? That is going to be the question to answer. And the great news, the fantastic news, is that if they get Santos, and if it was Vekselberg that gave him this money, that may lead to an investigation into Vekselberg. That's nothing but good news for people interested in justice. Speaking of justice. So Donald Trump, maddeningly, is still a free man. And he's been using that fact to sow havoc in the country. Fortunately, there's a lot of great progressive voices out there these days. The internet has been a wonderful thing for the spread of knowledge, which tends to make people more progressive. The more you know, the more you tend to agree with progressive ideas. One of the rising stars in this new age is the Meidas Touch network. They do fantastic work. I think their reporting is good and their commentary is great. And amongst that group, there's a guy that I came across even more recently than some of the others you might be aware of. His name is Coach D. Hate the fact that he does a lot of his videos from the front seat of a car, but I love his takes. Here he is addressing Donald Trump's speech about the arrest of Ashley Babbitt's mother.
What's up, everyone? Coach D speaks here. So recently in Mar-a-Lago, a group of intellectually deprived folks gathered around to hear their leader recite lies and misinformation. Here's what he had to say.
Ashley Babbitt's mother was arrested yesterday because she was protesting the death of her daughter being shot by a lunatic who's got a record of not so good.
Let's be real here. Ashley Babbitt's mom was arrested for show so that she could grift people later. And
Yep.
She wasn't arrested for protesting anything. She was arrested because after being asked several times to move her protest from the street to the sidewalk, she wouldn't comply. But let's run back exactly what he said after that, because not only is it a bunch of lies, it's also very incoherent.
Actually, let's stick on that for a moment. Credit where it's due. It is sometimes a civil disobedience technique to get arrested intentionally. I do not believe that it was anything but a scam for Ashley Babbitt's mom to do what she did. Genuinely despicable. And I say this because anyone protesting for the January 6th insurrectionists, I'm sorry to say it, I realize one of the people we're talking about here died in the attempt, but she died in the attempt to what? Overthrow the government. Anyone protesting for them is willfully ignoring, 6-8 months of just fact after fact after fact after fact being laid out for the American people. If you choose not to take in that information, I can't sympathize with you, even if I want to.
Check it out again.
Being shot by a lunatic who's got a record of not so good.
Being shot by a lunatic who has a record of not so good.
Wild.
Why does Donald Trump always sound like a third grader trying to give a 5-minute speech with only 3 minutes of information? And Ashley Babbitt wasn't shot by a lunatic. She was shot by a Capitol police officer who was trying to stop a lunatic who was in the process of jumping through a window and threatening the lives of our highest ranking elected officials.
Get him, Coach.
The guy he calls a lunatic has probably protected him while he walked the halls of Congress as well. The guy he calls a lunatic is a police officer who he claims to back all the time. You know, the next time one of your right-wing friends says back the blue, ask them if it includes Capitol police officers. Ask them if it includes Brian Sicknick and other Capitol police officers who have died as a result of the January 6th insurrection.
No notes for Coach D. He is in the no notes club. I wholeheartedly agree with everything he just said there. I think it's hard to talk about somebody like Ashley Babbitt's mother because we are tempted as progressives, generally speaking, and assuming you are one. If you're not, disregard. But we are tempted to err on the side of kindness. And let's be real, the woman lost her child. That is heartbreaking. But she's out there defending the person that got her child killed. She's working on behalf of the person that got her kid killed. It is not a kindness to pretend like what Ashley Babbitt's mom is doing is okay. And it is certainly not okay for us to ignore the fact that Trump was just up there, again, spreading misinformation. Again. He said, we are not going to let this go. We're not going to, what did he say, permit this? Allow this to happen? Okay. We let all that talk go before, and that resulted in January 6th. He apparently isn't afraid to go give another speech in front of a crowd, encouraging people to overthrow the government. Can't keep letting them have free shots at democracy. There's another one. Where's the answer for it? I'm looking. Where's the answer? The time has come to deal with this guy. We're having bizarre, almost nonsensical conversations now. The time has come to deal with this guy. We can't keep saying, okay, well, this is what was wrong with that. Here's the 30 things that were wrong with what he just said. Action needs to be taken. Let's get into what action we can take. Particularly, again, that word, if you are from one of 5 states listed in the description, there's a heck of a lot you can do. We don't need to rely on Merrick Garland, America's weakest attorney general, for justice. The one good thing about the scope of Trump's crimes is that they span state and federal violations. Now, state attorney generals, by and large, were happy to let Merrick Garland take up the investigations. There was precedent for it, which meant they could be forgiven for not doing all that work, I suppose. But now we have it where, one by one, that tune's changing. In my own state, Dana Nessel just reinvigorated, resurrected, I suppose, the state investigation into the false elector plot. Fani Willis in Georgia has been at it. She has been pursuing a case against Trump and company. If you recall, Brad Raffensperger was pressured over the phone to find the one more vote than Biden had, so that Trump could have that state as a win. He was threatened over the phone. It was recorded. Fani Willis is doing the right thing. She is pursuing that case. Here's MSNBC talking about it with her.
Andrew Weissman, let me bring you in. I want to show you some of what Fani Willis had to say about not treating different targets of an investigation differently. Let me play this.
If you are a member of a gang and you're committing a crime in my community, I am going to make sure that you are held responsible to the full extent of the law. People also...
Just got to pause it real quick to say that is also quite literal. She literally got a prosecution against a rapper called Young Thug on RICO charges. So she's being literal when she uses that analogy.
So seem to think that in society that there are certain people that are immune from prosecution if you are a celebrity, if you are a high-ranking public official.
Yes.
I guess that there is something strange with me. Lady Justice is actually blind. This is the reality.
A very welcome thing to hear when you take into consideration the pace of the criminal probes into Donald Trump. I spoke to a couple of members of the Select Committee, I think it was Congressman Adam Schiff on Friday, and I said, look, in the time that Republicans supported an independent commission to investigate the insurrection, gathered votes for it, then decided against that and killed it. And the Speaker assembled a select committee. The select committee hired investigative staff. They conducted an interview, interviewed 1,000 people, put on public hearings, and dismantled nothing from the federal criminal justice system on Trump's role in inciting a deadly insurrection on January 6th. Fani Willis, though, also in that amount of time has concluded her criminal probe. What are you looking for in terms of tea leaves?
I gotta say, I am very interested in this breakdown because Georgia's system is not familiar to me. This double grand jury thing. I believe this guy gives a wonderful explanation of it. It's really not familiar to me, so I'm excited to hear this.
First, I think it's so commendable, her statement about the rule of law and treating everyone the same, because let's get real. Rich people, white people, public celebrities, politicians are treated more favorably.
That was said on national television. It is so important that we are finally getting this at least acknowledged. And we need to keep up momentum to make sure we actually work to change that. Because there's been times in history I've heard this come up before. And I've heard people go, oh, that's not right. And then nothing changed and we went back to work. No, we have to capitalize on this momentum. But the good news is there's the momentum. It's here.
By and large, in the criminal justice system. And that is deplorable. So it's really wonderful to hear her say we're going to treat people the same, not better or worse. That's what it means to have the rule of law. And in terms of what I expect to see, obviously this is guesswork, but to me, this feels like an incoming heat-seeking missile. We're in this unusual position where there's sort of a two-step grand jury process, which is different than at the federal system. So there's a grand jury that just writes a report and hears evidence, and there's another grand jury that can actually bring charges. It is inconceivable to me that the first grand jury, having heard all of the evidence that you outlined, Nicole, that they're not going to say that there is probable cause, which is a relatively low standard, to bring charges against the former president. And with that, I think it makes it very hard for Fani Willis to then not bring those charges and not have a second grand jury actually present those charges. So to me, this feels not even like the calm before the storm. I mean, this to me is we are about to see the final step with Georgia charges against the former president. And the final point I'll make is, you know, we focus so much at the federal level, but these charges are the ones that can stick because.
Very good point. Because you can't pardon away state charges.
Regardless of whether a Republican wins the White House eventually, these charges are not.
Look, Republican, let's not. I know you might think Joe Biden would never pardon Trump. Dude, Nixon got pardoned. They would 100%. I don't understand it. I don't know why. I cannot offer you a logical explanation. I'll just say it makes me happy to hear the state charges route being looked at like this, as in a protection from pardons. Personally, I think because of our history with it, not the concept behind it, but because we've demonstrated how we use pardons in the USA, I would like to see the president's pardon power taken away.
Subject to a federal presidential pardon. So, you know, if you are Donald Trump right now, you have to be really concerned about what is going to happen in Georgia. And you can be sure he's going to start attacking Fani Willis like crazy and the system. But these are the charges that I think he should probably be most worried about.
Andrew Weissman, I was girding for a technical legal term, and then you dropped heat-seeking missile, and I think we were mind meld. I have a follow-up question for you, though. There's some brand new reporting out today that adds to our picture that Blaine has really painted for us with her great interviews and coverage of Fani Willis. But let me read this to you out of today's Washington Post. Using Georgia's expansive anti-racketeering law, a statute traditionally used against drug dealers, gang leaders, and mafia
as they just used against a young thug.
Figures. She and her colleagues won guilty.
Not a young thug. God, that sounds really the musician.
Guilty pleas from 21 educators and the convictions of 11 others in 2015 for accepting bonuses and other rewards while students suffered losing access to remedial education. Now, Willis is considering using the racketeering statute in another sprawling, politically treacherous investigation. The question this time is whether a former president, Donald Trump, conspired with his allies to break the law and attempt to overturn the 2020 election. Observers say the threat to Trump is real and immediate, and that the Fulton investigation could make him the first sitting or former president to be indicted on criminal charges. Willis has said she is considering subpoenaing Trump, has notified at least 18 others.
Observers say the threat to yada, yada, yada could make him the first sitting or former president to be indicted on criminal charges. I want to remind you of something we show all the GD time here. All the time. Please tell me I didn't get rid of it. I didn't. Excellent. If you are a regular watcher of this program, you will be familiar with what you are about to see, and that is every Republican president, and we're going to pause the video to go through this, every Republican president from Nixon till now. If you're a regular watcher, see if you can name these things before I do. Left to right. Crimes that they were not punished for in any way. The Chenault affair that extended the life of the Vietnam War. That's Richard Nixon. That is where he appears to have contacted the North Vietnamese and sabotaged Lyndon Johnson's peace talks with them so that he could get elected into office. Then he failed to secure peace. Extended the life of the Vietnam War, got Americans killed, zero consequences. Ronald Reagan and the man who was at the time his vice president, George H.W. Bush, they were in office together. Oh, isn't that sweet? The Iran-Contra scandal, where weapons were sold to Iran to fund the Contras' war against a socialist government in Nicaragua. Hearings were held. Who got in trouble for it? Barely got in trouble for it, mind you. Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. Then he got to be the head of the NRA before Charlton Heston. No punishment for Reagan. In fact, the guy is practically worshipped these days. It's maddening. No punishment for George H.W. Bush. By the way, even though it may not be a crime, their handling of the AIDS epidemic. George H.W. in particular. Insane. I'm saying in particular. That's not a legal matter, it's just a side note. These are despicable people. George W. Bush lied to the American people about the Iraq War. There were no weapons of mass destruction. We did not have intelligence saying there were. That was the lie he told. We, in fact, had intelligence saying the opposite, that Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction. What are the numbers? 7,000 American servicemen and women killed over the course of that war. 8,000 contractors. And now, Donald Trump. So, when they say that he could be the first president to actually be indicted on criminal charges, that is a huge deal. And it would be a first in America. but not the first time a president or former president did something worthy of indictment. And do bear that in mind. And Fani Willis is on my list of people that ought to replace Merrick Garland, but let's let her do what she's doing first.
They're targets in good faith indictment. The allegations are very serious. If indicted and convicted, people are facing prison sentences. What is your assessment of that sort of legal strategy of using Georgia's expansive anti-racketeering laws?
That's such a good question. So this really goes to a strategy call that, Barb and maybe Claire have had to make and I have had to make. I have to say that I'm generally of the view that you sort of lead with your strongest case and you keep it narrow and focused if you've got a strong case. Sometimes when you go broad, you create a bigger target for the defense to pick apart. So you want to just go with your absolute strongest case and just try it and keep it clean and quick and get in and get out. So that's sort of my sort of predilection and the way I sort of think about things. It is, however, very hard to second guess that when you're not inside and being able to truly assess the strength of the case. But in general, I wouldn't be a fan of going big unless you really have the evidence and you're not creating a target for the defense.
So, Barb, I want you.
So, viewer Purd says, let's pull that up here. It's frustrating to see how slow these processes are. It's hard to see things finalized within his life expectancy. That's a fair point. It's a frustratingly fair point. The good news is these state cases, they seem to be moving fast. And that's not an accident. The federal cases moving so slow is, in fact, what inspired the Michigan Attorney General to restart the state investigation. She had begun one already, Dana Nessel. But she did not, she paused it because Merrick Garland said he was looking into this. When I pulled up this slide, what I frequently talk about is the technique used in America, whether it was developed intentionally or just arose organically. The way this happens is the Attorney General or whoever's in charge of the investigation lets a lot of time pass. And they trust that the American people will move on culturally, emotionally, whatever, and just forget about it. That appears to be unacceptable to these attorney generals, Fani Willis and Dana Nessel. And I've got a list for you in a moment that we're going to get to, people that you can bug who might have an interest in getting this done quickly, too.
Your legal analysis as well. I also want to add another layer to this. I mean, Blaine made the wise point that we don't know what we don't know in terms of who testified before Fani Willis' special grand jury that was assembled for this. But what we do know is that in terms of the investigations into Trump's role in overturning his defeat in 2020, she did have access to, again, we don't know what they said, but she did have access to more people than seemed to have cooperated with the January 6th Select Committee. So your thoughts on the witnesses that we know about and what appears to be some reporting about what could be her legal strategy?
Yeah, so this idea about racketeering, I think, is a very interesting one. I think you can err on the side of going too big, and you can also err on the side of going too small. I've used racketeering statutes when you've had a criminal enterprise that's involved in a number of different types of schemes. For example, we had a public corruption case where the schemes were extortion and bribery and fraud and tax charges. And racketeering allows you to bring that whole case under one umbrella so that a jury can get the flavor for all of the criminal activity. But it could be an overkill to do that when the criminal conduct is really very focused on one crime, as it seems to be here, which is the crime of trying to defraud an election. And so in that case, I would think that you would want to be more narrowly focused on that. But you can go too far. I've seen cases where people go for the one and only single clean charge that they can find, and they ignore a lot of criminal activity. And then a jury is left not to know about all of that other criminal activity and to believe that the sole crime was this one little thing, like the one phone call. And so I think it's very important that Fani Willis here get the Goldilocks case, the one that's neither too big nor too small, one that encompasses all of the crimes here without trying to stretch it beyond its normal bounds. And so I would think that anybody involved in a conspiracy to undermine the outcome of this election would be fair game for a crime, but I would focus very much on the events occurring leading up to the November 2020 election and anything up to that phone call in early January of 2021.
And if they are going to do that, I would hope they do that with the understanding that they don't need to forget about all the other crimes. If you're talking about pursuing a case based on one crime that you think you can prove immediately, okay. Or one crime that you think you can get a conviction on right away, okay. It is important to still pursue a conviction in those other crimes if you think they happened. That is supposed to be what justice is about in America. It's not, at the end of the day, you can play all these games, but at the end of the day, did the thing happen or not? It's what the court is there to prove, the truth of it. Take an interest in that, American Justice Department, please.
Barb, let me drill down on one witness that we know was there, that spent at least a day there, and that's Cassidy Hutchinson. We know that she has firsthand knowledge of Trump's knowledge that he was defeated. It's a little snippet of testimony that has haunted me since I first heard it, and I read it again in her transcript. She and Mark Meadows are walking down the colonnade, as picturesque of a setting and on that 18-acre complex as any, and Trump lumbers toward them and says, no one can know we lost, which is both delusional and it would appear sort of smoking gun evidence that even he was aware that he had lost the 2020 election. And then the call comes to find 11,780 votes. How is Cassidy Hutchinson likely to have been used by this criminal probe as a witness against Mark Meadows and Donald Trump?
Yeah, I think that exchange, Nicole, is critically important. It isn't just, a made-for-Hollywood moment. It's a made-for-the-courtroom moment. There has been some criticism of the testimony of Cassidy Hutchinson when it relates to things like what happened in the presidential limousine on January 6th, because her knowledge was hearsay. This is not. This is firsthand observation. She is a percipient witness to this exchange, and she can testify about it. I would add on to that the other evidence that Donald Trump knew he had lost before making that call, what William Barr said to him, what Chris Krebs said to him, what the Justice Department said to him. He absolutely knew by the time he made that call that the election was lost and it was a legitimate election. And so that is essential to proving a criminal intent to defraud. And so I think Cassidy Hutchinson could be a very important witness in this case in Georgia.
All right, so what are we seeing here? We are seeing state attorney generals fed up with Merrick Garland. You all in the comments have expressed the number one comment I hear. And by the way, it flatters me immensely that I'm getting to communicate with a group of people I've never met in person before. And the number one thing they have to say is heartening to me, which is that they're sick of waiting for Merrick Garland. Good. We should be. Our state attorney generals appear to be sick of waiting as well. There's this line I always hear from these people. Well, these are important investigations and they take time. Okay. They might take 8 months. They might take 10 months. There is nothing about Trump's conduct that would require it to take years to get a conviction. I'm not saying to convict him on everything, although we should try to convict him on everything eventually. Everything that he's done that is illegal. That's not that's not a wild ask. That's what happens when you live in a civilized society. But to convict him, to even file charges on one thing. How about stealing classified documents? How about not returning them immediately when asked? To not convict him on one thing. Now we're in 2023. That's wild. That's absolutely insane. We are going into our third year without a conviction. In a just country, he would have been convicted while in office. We know we don't live in one. We're trying to deal with the reality we have. Good news is, particularly given the apparent mindset of state attorney generals, they're understanding that you all have run out of patience. We actually, as in you watching, me, we actually can have an effect on this. We talk very frequently about how infrequent it is for progressive-minded people to actually contact a politician. They're reliable voters. They are not reliable for contacting politicians. Within the progressive culture, for some reason, that is a taboo. It shouldn't be. If you're wondering how right-wingers have so much influence in this country, yes, a lot of it has to do with corruption. But also, it is because, since Roger Ailes started Fox News early on, it's within their culture to contact politicians. It's a very normal thing for them. It has to be for us as well. Now, the fake elector scheme. That's almost a subplot of the broader topic of trying to overturn the 2020 election. Trump tried a lot of things. January 6th was his last-ditch effort. As the January 6th committee laid out, it was not his first effort. His first effort, with Roger Eastman and a number of others, as a matter of fact, quite a long list of others, including state Republican organizations. His first effort was to try to send in false electors. So when your state gets together and counts all the votes, the electors then assign all of their votes to whoever got the popular vote within that state. That's how it works. Trump's plan, through Eastman and Giuliani, was to have states send in the wrong guy. 7 states in particular. The Arizona Mirror wrote about this. This was earlier in the summer, or this was in 2022 in the summer. But it's a fantastic article for a very quick insight into what the fake electors plot is. And I'm going to tell you what you can do about it at the end of it.
Andrew Weissman, let me bring you in. I want to show you some of what
I intended. I do apologize. Stand by while I get rid of MSNBC. There we go. Groups from Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, New Mexico, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin all allegedly met in December of 2020 and sent lists of so-called alternate electors to the National Archives after the 2020 election. The scheme is reportedly under investigation by the FBI and the Department of Justice, which have issued subpoenas to several of the people involved. Issued subpoenas and done little else that we're aware of. We've seen no tangible evidence in the form of indictments and convictions. For background, so you understand where this elector plot came from, it's based off of when Hawaii was not sure, appeared to genuinely not know who had won the vote, I think during Kennedy's election. Hawaii wouldn't have decided it, though. And what they did was prepare a slate of electors for both of the two top candidates, with the agreement of both the Democrats and Republicans. As in, it was, a handshake. All right, well, when we finish counting, then they'll have them, and we'll make a phone call, and that'll be that. The GOP of 2020, which is unfortunately the same GOP we have now because of our lack of action from Garland, they used that and twisted it and said, well, we're going to use that as our precedent and our excuse to just say Trump won. During a recent committee hearing, Representative Adam Schiff explained how Trump and his campaign were directly involved. Trump was directly involved, according to the J6 committee, in the scheme to replace Joe Biden's legitimate electors, also known as a coup. They convinced people to sign on to documents that would be used. Oh, Jake, why are you? There we go. That would be used if Trump were successful in litigation, but then continued the scheme anyway, even as the campaign continuously lost in court and top advisors and lawyers backed away from involvement. Let me be clear. I think the Arizona Mirror got one thing that's huge wrong there. Pennsylvania did that. It's possible in Arizona that was another state that said this, but not every state had that stipulation that they would only send these initially if it were found that Trump was successful in his attempt to do a coup with the courts through judges he appointed. That was another one of his plans. No, other states were fully on board for just sending the electors anyway. My own state, to my shame, tried to do that. People from my state. I shouldn't blame the whole group for the failings of a few. Schiff also displayed text messages revealing how Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin likely played a part in the scheme. The texts show how Johnson's chief of staff attempted to coordinate the handoff of the slate of fake electors to former Vice President Mike Pence. Johnson initially denied any involvement, but then admitted he was on an email chain regarding the scheme. No duh. Remember that super awkward interview where he's caught by a reporter out in public with this accusation, and his response with the fact that he was caught out by a reporter in public with the fact that his chief of staff attempted to do this, and he claimed, because he panicked, he claimed, I didn't know. He just handed me some documents, and I tried to send those along. I didn't know what they were. Your chief of staff is apparently just playing this game. You have no idea what your chief of staff. Okay. So here's why we need to get involved. This was, and it's important to understand, this article was written in the summer of last year, as in before the election. Despite renewed attention in Washington, despite renewed attention in Washington on the fake electors, we're already at a point where we need to renew attention on this. It was starting to work. We need to be grateful for the Jan 6 committee, but they're not around anymore, so now it's on us. We need to make sure charges get filed. The vast majority of people involved in the scheme have so far escaped scrutiny. It's not even that they had a trial and they were let go. They haven't even been indicted. The slate of fake electors now includes at least 4 current candidates for office, including Burt Jones, I wonder why he's highlighted, who won the Republican primary for lieutenant governor in Georgia and will appear on the ballot in November. I'm going to not put you through the rest of that. Burt Jones is the lieutenant governor now. Lieutenant governor in Georgia, it looks like was involved in a coup. Merrick Garland's failure to hold him accountable allowed him to be on the 2022 ballot and get elected. So now what? If it turns out that Burt Jones did do this, and it sure looks like he did. If it turns out Burt Jones did this, what are the consequences? Well, Georgia's going to have to find a new lieutenant governor. That's on Merrick Garland. All the costs associated with that, all the political upheaval associated with that, that's on Merrick Garland. Thank God Fani Willis is on the ball here, but we cannot think of all the other states. There were 7 states that had the fake electors plot happen in them. Think of all the figures involved in that. As a matter of fact, I have a list for you right here. Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, New Mexico, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Green check marks mean there are state investigations active into the fake electors plot, or, generally speaking, election interference. If you are from Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Pennsylvania, or Wisconsin, I've provided in the description a link to your Attorney General's contact page. I believe one of those only takes phone calls, but most of them accept emails or phone calls. I also provided a script. If you're looking for a concise way to say what you are feeling regarding a desire to have your vote protected, justice sought on your behalf by the number one person who's supposed to be doing that, there is a script in the description you can read. If you're from Georgia or Michigan, it might be a good time to contact your Attorney General anyway and say thank you. I see what you're doing, and I'm appreciative of it, because you know they're getting lots of hate mail, because conservatives do not have a problem with contacting public officials. Progressives need to get their voice heard as well. I highly recommend you use that. Here's some good news. If you're from Arizona, your Attorney General is Chris Mays. She only won by 280 votes. She is probably making some rather stiff political calculations. And that's going to be bearing in mind that by and large, politicians tend to think that centrism equals votes. In modern politics, that's not true, but it's taking them a long time to realize that. It's taking Democrats much longer. Got news for you. Those were states that Trump was trying to overturn for a reason. Every one of those people is a Democrat, every one of the attorney generals. So she won by 280 votes, Chris Mays, in Arizona. She might be making the calculation, ooh, I don't want to get MAGA riled up against me, though. I want to try to win some of their votes. Make sure she knows that if she's going to get progressive votes, if she's going to get your vote, she better look after your interests. You just had an election go by. Who knows how many people involved in the state Republican Party at the time were involved in the elector plot. We won't know until there's a complete investigation. By the way, the more I look into this, the more I am convinced states should be doing their own investigations, regardless of what the federal government's doing. Why? Because we can't just stop at Trump. We need to get everybody who committed a crime. It's that simple. It shouldn't be a political thing. It has been made into one because politics affects the likelihood of somebody having justice done. If a Republican commits a crime, they are very unlikely to get punished for it. That said, it shouldn't be political. Simple fact is, if somebody did a crime, they ought to get punished for it. If somebody tried to make your vote irrelevant in the United States of America, a place which prides itself on being a successful democracy, my God, your attorney general better be on that like white on rice. Are you kidding me? So if you're in Arizona, tell Chris Mays, who's looking at that 280 vote win, tell her you're one of those votes. And if she wants another one, we better not have another 2022. 2020 was brutal. 2022 was shameful. If you're in New Mexico, Raul Torres, that's your attorney general. Also a Democrat, contact in the description. If you're in Nevada, that's Aaron Ford. Same message as above. There is no, to my knowledge, current state investigation into the electors' plot, and yet Nevada is known to have been involved in it. And yet, we have seen years go by, it's clear Merrick Garland has no interest in protecting the American people. Tell your attorney general that you do, and they better. If you're in Pennsylvania, you got an interesting situation. That is Josh Shapiro. If you know the name as the governor-elect, you're not wrong. But it looks like his replacement is going to be Michelle Henry. Write them anyway. Write them anyway. It's never a bad thing to let your representatives know that you're watching them and that you care. It makes it more likely that your interest will be looked after. Finally, if you're in Wisconsin, Josh Call is your man. And just like with everybody else that doesn't have green check mark up there, the link is in the description. There is no current state investigation. If there is a federal investigation that actually, miraculously, does come to pass, and Merrick Garland gets, let's be honest, pressured enough by the American people to do his job. If that happens, there's no guarantee that he gets everybody involved. In fact, it's very likely that he doesn't get everybody involved in your states. In your states, part of this plot. This was a massive, genuinely, I can't believe I'm an internet guy talking about conspiracy theories, except there's no theory. The January 6th committee was pretty darn, they crossed their T's, they dotted their I's. They were pretty darn thorough. There was a conspiracy. It just needs to be charged. And there's a great chance that Merrick Garland, who has dragged his feet to just get Trump, he won't get everybody that was involved in your state. Your state's attorney general is much more likely to. Your state's attorney general is much more likely to look after your state's interest and therefore your interests. Contact him. We have more good news, which is that attorney generals are human beings just like you or me. They're ambitious just like you or me, and they get jealous just like you or me. And these attorney generals, all Democrats, all hanging out in the same club, they're seeing these headlines with Dana Nessel, Fani Willis, and they are probably a little bit jealous. Take advantage of that. Contact them. Mention the other AGs. This has been Wicked. That stands for What You Can Do. My name's Jake.
Talk to me nice, ain't about winning, don't talk to me twice. I don't play dice, I'll make a move on the board, it's precise. The fuck is the price? I took a fiddle and dipped it in ice. I took a call and now I'm on a flight. Crew heading east, got a booking tonight. First stop is Atlanta. I got breakfast plans at the Waffle House. Next up is Miami. I'm hitting South Beach. What we talking about? Show out, we in Brooklyn. I'm on Flatbush and we rocking out. Then a red eye to Los Angeles. Got a rich bitch waiting on the couch. Life's gonna try to hold you back. They gon' tell you that you still got time. Any minute this could all fade to black. That's why we run it up. I want more, it's not enough. I ain't come for the runner-up. I go in, I'ma win a cup. I go in, I'ma fuck it up. Ain't gon' lose, I'ma level up. I've been down, but I got tough. Hey, run it up, run it up, run it up.
Run it up, run it back, run it up, run it back. Run it, man, we was on 100 since run that. Tell me where the lunch at, I ain't eat lunch yet. Now you gotta front that, let me get a fronto, let me get a blunt wrap. We was on a one pack, let me get a bust down. Let me get an ace though, now I feel jacked in. I was on a payroll, this is all back then. Oh my, I'ma need a whole pot. Sitting on a big yacht, looking at a coastline. Lo-fi, bumping on 4-5s. Never let a track sit, please play the whole side. Whole time co-stars, looking for a cosign. They ain't even close though, put them on a close line.